maybe I could say three different things that are related. One, it seems to me that you're suggesting maybe that this kind of loss of religion narrative isn't isn't quite right. This idea of kind of disproving disbelief, like, is not kind of the prominent narrative that's in the water, as it were, even in Western society. And this kind of narrative that I guess secularism has been kind of has held a lot of sway, maybe even in our Western world in America, and for the last maybe 50 years or so. Such that I think this is helpful for clarifying, and maybe we can chip away at this even more here and in later discussions. But I mean, I'm kind of operating out of this, in even the way I'm framing some of the questions, operating out of a kind of sense that kind of secularism was a bit more prominent, maybe in Western society. I don't have a number to give to it, but it's a bit more prominent. And so this is why apologetics was moving in the way that it was to provide rational grounds, right, for theistic belief and for motivating religious belief, because there was kind of a stronger sentiment that there may not be a God. I mean, so I'm thinking, like, for example, like, lots of things come to mind. I wrote an article for Christianity Today. It's a theological world, after all. And in the 60s, you had this God is Dead movement, which seemed to impact secular society in the West. And then you had, certainly you had the unseating of kind of theological authority after that. I mean, you never saw a theologian on the Times magazine after that. Whereas before, I mean, you had Barth and you had other apparently great theologians, even Roman Catholic theologians on Times magazine. But after that, I don't think you did. Theological loss, its kind of authority in the West, it seemed. It was ceded by kind of some kind of scientism, arguably, maybe sociology. And then you had you had, even in the academic centers, you had this legal precedent for treating biblical text or revelatory texts as effectively literary devices or historically interesting. So you could have classes on that, but not like proper theology like you have in like Germany. Wolfhart Pannenberg was like strongly motivating this idea that theology is a serious discipline. It's an academic discipline, even a science at one level. So I'm just saying all that. I think I'm wondering if, maybe you're right. I think there's a lot to what you're saying that it seems right as well. I think I've operated with the assumption that maybe secularistic atheism had a bit more sway in our earlier history than maybe I'm mistaken. And this also, I mean, there's this narrative going around that a lot more people are kind of more attracted to kind of spirituality as well as demonism and the demonic, and there seems to be an uptick in like oppression, spiritual oppression, demonic infestation, or even demonic oppression, demonic possession. So there's a lot of talk about this now as well. It seems that's gone up. That's been an uptick, which would seem to be a counter to what would otherwise be a kind of a cultural trend toward secularism and kind of the dampening of kind of the awareness of the demonic and the like. So you have this kind of narrative in these discussions taking place as well. Yeah.
Well, Joshua, I did watch the entire episode you did with Roger Olson.
Oh, good.
On this topic.
Oh, you did? Cool.
Yeah, I did. So I know some of the things you just said, you're pointing out about theologians being seen as authorities prior to maybe the 1960s, then all of a sudden, nobody's going to be running to the theologian for advice
No,
on
right,
much of anything
right. Or
after that.
pastors, like they used to. Pastors
Yeah,
used to have authority, right?
right. I'm not going to discount that what I'm calling scientism or scientific materialism, that kind of strict A.J. Ayers,
Yeah.
maybe Quine, and
Bertrand
those
Russell.
Russell. Although I think Russell
Yeah.
gets a little spooky towards the end, but yeah,
That's true, he does. Yeah, that's
yeah.
true, he does. Yeah, he does. He
Well, because
does.
you never know at the end of the day what these guys' personal lives, we
He
got their
became, he
we got
was,
their writings, but
he toyed with mysticism, of
yeah,
course,
yeah,
all the time. Yeah,
yeah.
some kind of mysticism.
Which is
Yeah.
interesting to think about there, what's going on there at the personal level. So you do have I think you do have a narrative that has evidence for it that a kind of strict scientific materialism seemed to have a great amount of influence in the English speaking world, at least, and other parts of Europe. But I think, we're almost saying it was fairly short lived in a sense. If, we want to say maybe it had its heyday in the 40s and 50s. But again, we're talking with Carl's giving a pretty detailed history of like from the 60s onward, 60s, 70s, 80s, all of these kind of spiritual approaches to global political questions at very high levels of governance and legal jurisprudence, and they're not coming at these questions from this kind of pure sort of atheistic worldview. They're not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a good example of that is the role of the Esalen Institute in the 1960s.
Yeah,
So the
I love
Esalen,
you guys.
so the Esalen Institute is blending. It's engaged in blending humanistic psychology, human potential, psychedelic spirituality, Eastern mysticism, and all of this is converging in one location as you have maverick theologians going to soak in the hot tubs and hang out with buddies who, I guess they become buddies from the Department of Defense, university professors, countercultural insiders, and they're all there together exchanging and interacting and, in a sense, cross-pollinating ideas across multiple disciplines, including spirituality and what we would consider to be secularism. And it's this incredible mashup of sorts that acts as the intellectual engine for the counterculture, but has a profound effect upon educators, policymakers. I mean, even the U.S. Army's motto, "Be all you can be," which came out of the 1980s, was a direct result of sitting in the hot tubs at Esalen. And yet, at the same time, Esalen was giving us psychedelic spirituality, bringing the gurus from the East to the West, at least in terms of their worldview, their perspective, their teachings. And so you have examples where this bridging is taking place in the 60s, 70s, and it continues to this day. I look at my time attending Burning Man and seeing the same kind of milieu at play, where Burning Man is both secular and spiritual, material and mystical, and it all comes together and kind of coalesces in this bizarre experience that nobody can really quantify, but it's all there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. What was
Yeah.
this group what is this group you're referring to?
Oh, the Esalen Institute, which really connects
Esalen.
deeply. Yeah, which connected really deeply with Stanford. In the 70s and 80s, they were a back channel between American diplomats and Soviet diplomats. Acted as a really interesting back channel that way, played a huge role. Their worldview was definitely a onist worldview, to the point where Mikhail Gorbachev himself found influence through what was being lectured and being discussed at Esalen, and really probably bugged the place. In fact, he made motions towards that. And so perestroika and glasnost itself ends up having almost little fingers in the Esalen experience as they are playing back and forth with each other. And it's not surprising that the Esalen Institute, one of its main players, ends up becoming the Gorbachev Foundation's president. So, my goodness, there's so many interplays between this world of what we would consider to be New Age spirituality, because that's what Esalen was playing with. But it was doing more than that. It was engaged within the realm of politics and what we would consider to be secular humanist pursuits along the lines of different, different branches of thought with psychology, the human potential movement. Mm-hmm. But it's mashing it up and giving us all of a sudden a brand new way of looking at the world. And that's what I think makes this era that we're in kind of difficult to really nail down and categorize. We call it postmodern, or we would call it re-enchanted. And some people will argue, oh, this is just an extension of modernity. We're in this point of flux. And you're seeing spirituality all of a sudden intersecting with secularism. And it's a bizarre landscape that we find ourselves. When you start hearing, atheists, when I'm at Burning Man, a great example is I'm doing surveys, worldview surveys. One of the questions that I had is the Earth fundamentally alive? That's, you agree strongly, agree somewhat, or neutral, disagree, or disagree strongly. Everybody that in my worldview categories on my survey said I'm an atheist. All of them, and I do mean all of them, said yes, the Earth is fundamentally alive. What? I thought you were a hardcore atheist. Now you're into the realm of a type of global mythology.
I want to add, so by the way, Carl, you probably know this. Joshua Esalen is still around. I looked it up. Yeah, I looked it up recently. I thought I might book a hothouse to go up there. It's not that far up the road from me, but right. Yeah, no, it's still there. And Carl, when I read in the book the connection between the Soviets, Gorbachev in particular, and Esalen, it kind of blew my mind. I got to say, it really did. I've referenced that in several articles, that connection.
Hey, when Esalen outmaneuvers the Brookings Institute, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, when it outmaneuvered, I believe, the Council of Foreign Relations to host Yeltsin's travels to America for the first time, bringing over this, here we have the head of Russia coming over, and it's Esalen that does it, not these other major players in the realm of foreign affairs, but in this nebulous little enclave of where we marry and wed together spirituality and secularism. Yeah, Esalen was an absolute major player, not even behind the scenes. They were front and center, but for the most part just ignored because it's weird hippie stuff. That's how the church, that's one of the other interesting side notes to this is the church's response was always, a bunch of dirty hippies, a bunch of weirdo hippies. Hello. They all put on business suits and are now, in essence, retaining that worldview while they're in positions of influence, power, and prestige. I mean, they're writing your software. We're using their apps.
Yeah, especially in the tech field. Especially, we were talking a little bit about the early history of witchcraft, online witchcraft, where you remember Margot Adler. And drawing down the moon, she notices an incommensurate number of neo-pagans and magic users in the tech fields in Simi Valley and Silicon Valley and stuff. So,
100%.
Not just they may be college dropouts, but that doesn't mean they haven't been super successful in their business or tech or political careers. Two other things at the level of the philosophical level that I might add, and Carl just referenced Teilhard de Chardin. And I think too, it's like, there have been competing philosophical constructs to scientism that have also been influential. And one of them has been process theology. And I don't think a lot of us in the conservative evangelical world countenance how much Hegel and his children have influenced Western culture. Hegel's process philosophy becomes the process theology of Whitehead and others, and Chardin especially. And this is, without getting into nitpicky metaphysical details, but this kind of God in process theology is also kind of very close or very amenable to a more kind of pagan theology, right? Where now the distinction between creator and creation, a transcendent God and an entirely immanent God, is extremely blurry. That line is blurred. So you can get, and I have 3 or 4 books on my desk, a kind of pagan Christianity, right? Where Christianity is construed not as a theistic religion, but as a pantheistic religion. But alongside scientism, you have these process theologies also having their influence in the 1920s and 30s with guys like the Boston personalists on the East Coast and so on and so forth. And they had their influence as well, I think.